Hello, my friends, hello. Welcome once again to the stately and horrifying Vaughn Manor. Today we're going to go off topic a little bit and talk about movies instead of books. But it's the horror genre. And literature and film have been influencing each other for years and years. It's hard to read a book in the horror genre now that hasn't been influenced in some way by cinema. So it kind of fits. Besides, I saw Juan at Plagued by Visions do his 10 favorite horror movies, and if he can do it, I can do it. His version was really good. I'm going to link it down below. I'm going to do this in two videos. This video is my favorite horror movies from the 20th century. That was the last century that was not all that great, but somehow still better than the century we're in now. And next week will be my favorite horror movies from the 21st century, the rotten century that we're living in at this moment. So, but we have gotten some good horror movies this century, so there's that. But right onto the list, going 10 to 1 as we do in these lists, starting at number 10, The Return of the Living Dead. The Return of the Living Dead. This movie just drips the 80s. This was released in 1985, and boy, you can tell. Great horror comedy. I think it's billed as a horror comedy now. It might always have been. Because it is pretty hilarious, and it's got great pacing, and it's also scary in a fun way, and it's got great zombies in it. These are the brain-eating zombies. This is where zombies calling out for brains came from, this film. And it's got great zombies in it. It's got zombies that look different than most zombie films that you will have seen. So it's worth it just for that, and it's a great movie. I had the soundtrack. It has a great punk soundtrack. When I was a kid, I had it on vinyl. I have good memories of this movie. It was a lot of fun to watch. So that was that. That was number 10, which brings me to number 9, Creepshow from 1982. This is a great homage to EC Comics that was created by George Romero and Stephen King. This is the film that was Stephen King's acting debut, I believe, was in this movie. And boy, what a performance he gives. I'm shocked he didn't win an Academy Award for his performance in this movie. It was amazing. This was a lot of fun, this movie. My stepfather very kindly took me to this when I was 11, right when it came out. And it was such a good time. I loved it. I still love this movie. It's an anthology film, like I said, based on the EC Comics, the spirit of the EC Comics, which Stephen King loved, and you can tell. My favorite story in this is probably The Crate, although there's a lot to recommend. Father's Day, also. Great movie. A lot of fun. Creepshow. So that was that, which brings me to number 8. Horror of Dracula from 1958. This was one of the earlier Hammer films. Horror of Dracula. Hammer made some great horror movies from the late 50s on through the 70s. Great stuff. The Hammer horror movies. Some of them were not so great, let's be honest, but a lot of them were a lot of fun, and I really like Horror of Dracula. It's actually my favorite Dracula movie, even though it's not faithful to the book. Really, it's kind of a bizarro version of Dracula. A lot of changes. Not all the changes were great, but it looks wonderful, this film, and it's got Peter Cushing as Van Helsing, my favorite Van Helsing, and my favorite Dracula, Christopher Lee, as Dracula. And these two give great, great performances. And this movie is worth it just for that. It is magnificent, a magnificent beginning to their long-running Dracula series of horror films. So yeah, the Horror of Dracula. I really like this one. I used to catch this on TV whenever I could. So Horror of Dracula from 1958, which brings us to number 7, and boy, is this a great movie. This scared the heck out of me when I was a kid. This is Invasion of the Body Snatchers from 1956. The original Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Man, this scared the heck out of me when I was a kid. It's still kind of scary when you watch it today. with the pod people. Brilliantly directed, excellent pace in this film, really good performances, a horrifying idea, one of the most insidious alien invasions you'll ever come across. They did make a very excellent remake of this in 1978. That is also well worth seeing. I recommend that one as well if you haven't seen it. Both those movies are great. But I really like this one the best. From 1956, Invasion of the Body Snatchers. What a great movie. Watch that movie if you haven't done so already, which brings us to another alien menace in number 6. This is The Thing. The Thing. The Thing from 1982. I liked The Thing from Another World from the 50s also. That was another great movie. But nothing beats The Thing from 1982. That was a scary movie. People are still scared when they watch this. This is a scary alien invasion movie. Yeah, full of paranoia, and it's claustrophobic and just horrifying because this has some of the most terrifying practical creature effects you will ever see. Horror movie effects should always be practical when you can do it. CGI, if it's not done great, sometimes even if it is, it can take you right out of a film. But this, everything looks so creepy. I mean, it has some stuff in here I wouldn't be able to forget even if I wanted to. It's just amazing. The Thing from 1982, which brings me to number 5. Dawn of the Dead. When there's no more room in hell, the dead will walk the earth. This is the real Dawn of the Dead. This is the one from 1978. I wanted to see this movie for years. I had only heard about it and read about it when I was a little kid, but I wasn't able to see it until it came out on videotape. And so I was a teenager when I finally saw Dawn of the Dead, and man, was it worth the wait. Let me tell you, this movie's great. I mean, I loved Night of the Living Dead. I'm surprised it didn't make this list. I kind of surprised myself with that, because that movie scared the crap out of me when I was little. But Dawn of the Dead, man, a masterpiece of horror. This is back on the days when there were not many zombie movies. There was like Night of the Living Dead and this one, and that's it. And both those movies were terrifying. I still have zombie nightmares. And it's from these movies. It's not from all the zombie nonsense that's floating around today. It's from these movies. The Night of the Living Dead movies. In particular, Dawn of the Dead. It was just, at the time when I watched it, it was one of the most graphic things I'd ever seen. It was great. Great stuff. I loved it. Yeah. Dawn of the Dead from 1978. Which brings us to number 4. You knew this one had to show up. Another great reanimated dead film. It's ReAnimator. ReAnimator from 1985. I've talked about this before recently. And I'm talking about it here again because it's magnificent. ReAnimator from 1985. They've made a lot of good movies in the 80s. What can I tell you? A lot of good horror was from the 80s. It just was. What can I say? And this one was really good. Brilliant performance by Jeffrey Combs as Herbert West, the Reanimator. Certainly some scenes in this movie you'll never forget. Be sure to watch the uncut version. Don't watch that one that's streaming. Pony up and get a copy of this, the uncut version. You'll be happy you did. It's got Barbara Crampton in it. That should be enough. So Reanimator, that was number 4, which brings me to number 3. This movie, which I've probably seen more than any other movie on this list. An American Werewolf in London from 1981. I love this movie. Werewolves are my favorite monster. I love werewolves. I've always loved werewolves. This is my second favorite werewolf movie, actually. An American Werewolf in London. I loved it. It's genuinely scary. Also funny and scary. It manages that. It walks the line. Again, it has a very 1980s feel to it when you watch it now. It has been famous for its transformation scene. The practical effects in the transformation scene were very impressive at the time. They're still kind of impressive if you watch it now. Really well done, this movie. One of the best werewolf movies ever made. One of them. They made a lot of good werewolf movies, and this is one of the best. An American Werewolf in London. Great movie. Loved it. Loved every minute of this movie, pretty much. Which brings us to number 2, which is my favorite werewolf movie of all time, and you know which one it is. It's The Wolfman from 1941 with Lon Chaney Jr. Lon Chaney Jr. gives the performance of his career, a career-defining performance. And I had never seen a movie quite like this when I first saw it. I saw this when I was a kid. They showed this movie, I think, every 3 months, and I always watched it whenever it was on TV. But I remember really being impressed by the idea of this guy who's in this tragic situation. He becomes this monster and he kills people and does terrible things which he doesn't want to do. He doesn't want to do these things, but he becomes a werewolf and he does them. You know, so even the people that he loves the most are in danger from him, which seemed just sad and frightening, which of course separates him from everybody. And this was, of course, the beginning of Lon Chaney Jr.'s werewolf saga, which continued on in the Universal movies. And so this guy couldn't even die. You know, they killed him in like every movie, and he kept coming back. Nothing could put this monster down, let me tell you, the Wolfman. But this movie is, again, really good pace, really well directed, pretty good screenplay, actually. A lot of really interesting ideas for werewolves were introduced in this movie. It's a heck of a movie. If somehow you haven't seen it, see it. You'll be glad you did. So that was The Wolfman, which brings us to number 1. What's number 1? You know what number 1 is. It can only be The Bride of Frankenstein. Possibly the greatest horror movie ever made, with Boris Karloff reprising his role from Frankenstein as the Frankenstein monster. This takes some ideas from Mary Shelley's Frankenstein and uses them to very good effect. And it also has a bunch of other stuff that was completely original to the film and probably original to film when this came out. It was tragic. It was funny. It was just a great movie. It is a great movie. It really holds up. Yeah, it's a spectacle. Pretorius is wonderful. Really clever, really well done. Leaps and bounds better than Frankenstein. Frankenstein was good. I like Frankenstein. Bride of Frankenstein is so much better. I mean, it's so much better than pretty much any horror movie from the time or even later. And certainly emotionally, this really affected me. I felt for the monster in this film, played by Karloff, more than I've ever felt for a monster before. Probably even more than Lon Chaney Jr. As much as I felt for him. The Bride of Frankenstein. This movie is in a class by itself. Brilliant. It's a brilliant piece of art, as well as being a great film, as well as being a great horror film. So that was it. That was my 10 favorite horror films from the 20th century. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you join me next week when we get into the 21st century. Films might get a little darker and gorier next week. Yeah. Next week's going to be something. So catch me next week for that. I will see you next time.